All right, so today we're diving deep into a book that's had, well, a pretty huge impact on how millions view their inner lives.
Yeah,
We're talking Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now.
that's right.
If you've ever felt overwhelmed by your thoughts or just longed for a deeper sense of peace, this deep dive is especially for you.
Absolutely. At its core, The Power of Now offers a potent insight, and it's this. The incessant thinking that occupies so much of our attention, that's not who we truly are.
Yeah.
And it's often the root of our suffering. Tolle invites us to discover a state of presence,
Right.
a connection to the now as the pathway to genuine happiness.
And it's not just some abstract concept here.
Yeah.
We're going to extract some really practical lessons from this book, I think.
Yeah.
Think of this as your shortcut to understanding the key ideas. Learning to observe your mind, rather than being controlled by it, recognizing the present moment as the only reality, and understanding how our attachments to the past and future create so much unnecessary pain.
And we'll also be looking closely at Tolle's concept of the pain body.
Right.
That accumulation of past emotional pain, and more importantly, how you can learn to disidentify from it.
Okay.
And then we'll explore those fascinating portals he talks about
Yes.
for accessing the power of the pain now, such as connecting with your inner body, finding stillness, and becoming aware of the space around you.
Exactly. We'll also delve into the true meaning of surrender, which might surprise you.
Yeah.
It's not about giving up, but about a deep acceptance of what is.
That's right.
We'll even consider how challenges, even difficult ones like illness, can become unexpected opportunities for inner awakening.
Mm-hmm.
And for anyone navigating relationships, Tolle offers some really thought-provoking perspectives on how these can become a profound spiritual practice.
Wow.
So finally, we'll touch on the broader vision Tolle presents, the possibility of a shift in collective consciousness. Our aim in this deep dive is to go through the essential concepts of the power of now, chapter by chapter, drawing out those key insights and connecting them to your own experiences.
That's right. Sounds good.
Okay, let's dive into chapter 1, which makes a really fundamental claim. You are not your mind. When Tolle talks about enlightenment, he's not describing some far-off spiritual achievement. The core insight here is that the primary obstacle to this natural state of peace is our ingrained belief that we are our constant stream of thoughts. What do you think about that?
You know, it's really powerful when you think about it.
Yeah.
He introduces this idea with a really memorable analogy. The beggar who sits on a box his entire life unaware that it's filled with gold.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You know, that beautifully illustrates that what we're often searching for, that sense of fulfillment, that connection to something deeper, it might be right here within us, unnoticed, because our attention is so focused externally or lost in our mental narratives.
Right, yeah. Tolle clarifies that this enlightenment, it isn't some mystical ability reserved for a select few.
Yeah.
He presents it as our inherent state, a felt sense of oneness with what he calls being.
Yeah.
This being is that eternal, ever-present life force that underlies all the temporary forms we perceive, and crucially, it's also your deepest, truest self. So it's not like out there, it's in here.
That's right. And what's so fascinating here is that Tolle emphasizes this being isn't something you can intellectualize your way to.
Oh, interesting.
You can't think it into existence. It's only when the mind quiets down, when you are fully present in this very moment, that you can actually feel this connection. It's a state of direct experience, a knowing beyond thought.
Which brings us to the challenge,
Yeah.
that relentless inner dialogue. Tolle argues that identifying with our minds creates this constant mental noise that acts like a barrier, preventing us from experiencing that inner stillness. It also constructs this illusory, often fear-driven self, what he later refers to as the ego. Have you ever noticed how your mind can just run on and on even when you don't want it to?
Absolutely, yeah. And Tolle makes a really important distinction.
Yeah.
Thinking itself isn't the problem. It's a vital tool when we need to solve a problem, plan something, or learn a new skill. The dysfunction arises when thinking becomes compulsive, when your mind is constantly chattering, often about things that are irrelevant or even harmful. It's like the tool has become the master. This incessant mental activity creates a false sense of separation, the feeling that you are an isolated individual, cut off from everything and everyone else.
Yeah, and it's in those fleeting moments when the mental noise subsides.
Yeah.
Those little gaps between your thoughts, what Tolle calls the no-mind state, that you can catch a glimpse of that inner stillness and the underlying joy of being. It's not about becoming unconscious or losing awareness. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's a state of heightened alertness, of being fully present to what is.
Exactly. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't thinking absolutely essential for navigating the complexities of daily life? And Tolle absolutely acknowledges that for practical purposes, thinking is necessary.
Of course, yeah.
But he points out that for most people, a staggering percentage, he suggests, 80 to 90% of our thinking is repetitive, unproductive, and often negative.
Wow, really?
Leading to a significant drain on our mental and emotional energy.
Oh.
It's like constantly replaying the same old stories in your head without any real benefit.
Right. And this leads us to the concept of the ego, which Tolle defines as that false sense of self that arises from this unconscious identification with the mind. He describes it as a kind of survival machine, constantly scanning for threats, defending its perceived territory, and accumulating information, but fundamentally lacking in true creativity. Have you ever noticed how the ego often thrives on conflict and comparison?
Absolutely. What's particularly insightful here is Tolle's assertion that true creativity doesn't spring from this constant mental activity, but rather from that spaciousness of no mind.
Oh, interesting.
From moments of inner stillness.
Okay.
He even draws upon the experiences of great artists and scientists like Einstein,
Oh, right.
who often reported that their most significant breakthroughs came during periods of mental quietude, where conscious thinking played a subordinate role to intuition and insight. It makes you wonder how much untapped potential lies within that quiet space we so often try to fill with thinking.
Yeah, it really does. And what about those positive emotions we all seek, like love and joy?
Right.
Tolle suggests that these aren't really emotions in the same fleeting sense as anger or fear. Instead, he says they are intrinsically linked to our natural state of connection with being and are often experienced most purely in those very gaps between thoughts when the mind isn't dominating our awareness.
Right. He elaborates that emotions, by their very nature, the Latin root emover means to disturb. They are disturbances in our inner state. They exist on a more superficial level than those deeper, more abiding states of love, joy, and peace, which can only truly flourish when we are no longer dominated by the incessant demands and judgments of our minds.
And connecting this back to Eastern philosophies, Tolle touches upon the Buddha's teachings on desire and craving. He explains that these are fundamentally the mind's strategies for seeking fulfillment in external things and projecting happiness into some imagined future moment. This constant chasing of desires actually prevents us from experiencing the inherent joy of being that is available to us right here, right now.
That's right.
So the key lesson from this first chapter, and a practice you can start applying immediately, is to begin to consciously observe your own mind. Notice your thoughts as if they were clouds passing in the sky, without getting entangled in them or believing that they define who you are. Instead of blindly following those desires and cravings, try simply acknowledging them, recognizing them as mental events rather than essential aspects of your identity. And as he mentions, we'll delve deeper into the nature of pain, both the pain we create in the present and the lingering pain from the past in the chapters to come. So we should go to chapter 2.
Let's go to chapter 2.
All right, let's move into chapter 2. Consciousness, the way out of pain. Here, Tolle presents a somewhat challenging but ultimately empowering idea, that much of our human suffering is actually self-created. It arises from our non-acceptance at the present moment, from an unconscious resistance to what is. Have you ever found yourself mentally arguing with reality, wishing things were different than they are?
All the time.
Right.
That's precisely the kind of resistance Tolle is talking about. He explains that this resistance manifests in two primary ways. On the level of thought, it shows up as constant judgment, labeling things as good or bad, right or wrong, the way they should or shouldn't be.
Right.
And on the emotional level, it manifests as negativity, feelings of anger, frustration, sadness, anxiety. The more intensely we resist the present moment and the more deeply we are identified with our judgmental minds, the more intense our experience of pain becomes. It's like pushing against a door. The harder you push, the more resistance you feel.
And while various spiritual traditions might talk about all pain being ultimately an illusion, Tolle takes a very practical approach.
Yeah.
He asks, even if that's intellectually true, does simply believing it magically dissolve your suffering?
Right.
What truly matters, he contends, is realizing this truth through your own direct experience,
Mm.
making it a felt reality rather than just an abstract concept.
This is where he introduces the crucial concept of the pain body.
Right.
He describes it as an accumulation of trapped life energy, the emotional residue of past painful experiences that has become almost like an autonomous entity within us through our unconscious identification with our minds. This pain body, he explains, has a kind of self-preservation instinct. It seeks to perpetuate itself by feeding on negative emotions, both your own and those of others. Think of it like a dormant emotional parasite that gets activated by negativity.
Yeah, that's a rather unsettling but also potentially liberating idea.
Yes.
This accumulation of emotional baggage that can seem to take on a life of its own.
Yeah.
But the encouraging news is that Tolle offers a path to freedom, disidentification. He says you can learn to become the conscious watcher of this pain body. By bringing your focused awareness to it, by feeling its energy field within you without judgment or reaction, you begin to break the cycle of identification. It's like shining a light into a dark corner. The darkness doesn't disappear, but its power over you diminishes.
Exactly. When you become the witness, the pain body can no longer trick you into believing that it is you. It can no longer replenish itself through your unconscious reactions and your identification with negative thought patterns. You begin to tap into your own inner strength, the inherent power of the attainable, which lies beyond the reach of the pain body.
Now, Tolle cautions that when you first start to disidentify, the pain body might not surrender easily. It might try to reassert its control through negative thoughts, intense emotions, even physical sensations.
Whoa.
It has a kind of momentum built up over time. Have you ever tried to break a bad habit and felt that strong pull to revert?
Right.
It's a similar dynamic.
He uses the analogy of a spinning flywheel that continues to turn even after you stop applying force.
Okay.
So at this stage, it's absolutely crucial to remain present, to be the ever-alert guardian of your inner space, as he puts it.
Right.
You need to be consciously aware enough to observe the pain body directly, to feel its energy without letting it hijack your thinking. The moment your thoughts align with that negative energy, you become re-identified and the cycle continues.
So the core message of this chapter is that while the mind itself is a remarkable tool, dysfunction arises when we seek our sense of self in it, when we mistakenly believe it is who we truly are. That's when the egoic mind takes over and the pain body can flourish. By cultivating consciousness, by learning to observe our thoughts and emotions without judgment or immediate reaction, we begin to step out of this self-created cycle of pain and into the freedom of presence.
Yes.
All right, how about chapter 3?
Yeah, chapter 3 is titled End the Delusion of Time, and it really strikes at the heart of Tolle's central message.
Okay.
He points out that spiritual teachers and traditions throughout history have consistently highlighted the now as the gateway to the spiritual dimension, yet somehow this profound truth has often remained obscured or misinterpreted in mainstream understanding.
He offers some really powerful examples to illustrate this. Think about Jesus' repeated admonition to take no thought for the morrow, or the intense Zen emphasis on walking along the razor's edge of now.
Yeah.
He even quotes Sufi wisdom, saying, the Sufi is the son of time present.
Yeah.
And Meister Eckhart's striking statement, time is what keeps the light from reaching us. These aren't just poetic phrases, are they?
Not at all. Tolle argues that these are profound teachings intended to be lived to bring about a real and tangible inner transformation.
Okay.
The problem is we often tend to intellectualize them,
Yeah.
to see them as abstract philosophical concepts rather than practical guidance for how to live in this very moment.
So how do we actually begin to access this elusive power of the Fradigo? Now, Tolle offers some very concrete advice. The first crucial step is to consciously break our deeply ingrained habit of denying or resisting the present moment. How often do you find yourself wishing you were somewhere else, doing something else?
I mean, it's a constant, right?
Right,
A
yeah.
constant yearning for a different moment. That's a form of resistance.
Exactly.
Tolle suggests actively withdrawing your attention from the past and the future whenever they're not absolutely necessary for practical purposes. He encourages you to observe your mind's relentless tendency to escape the now, either by endlessly replaying past events, or by fantasizing about a better future, or worrying about a worse one.
Right.
Both, he says, are ultimately illusions that distract us from the richness of the present.
And here's a really insightful point. The very moment you realize that you aren't present, you actually are present.
Yeah.
That moment of self-awareness, that recognition of your distraction, is itself a step out of the time-bound mind and into the now. It's like waking up from a dream within a dream.
That's a great way to put it. He emphasizes that cultivating intense presence is particularly vital during those times when you experience strong emotional reactions.
Right.
When your sense of self is threatened, when unexpected challenges arise, or when old emotional wounds are triggered. Our usual unconscious tendency is to become completely swept away by the reaction, lost in the drama of the mind.
Yeah, we go into autopilot, don't we?
Yeah.
Justifying our anger, blaming others, defending our position. But Tolle reminds us that in those moments, it's not really you acting with conscious awareness. It's the ingrained reactive pattern, the mind operating in its habitual survival mode, often driven by the pain body we discussed earlier.
Absolutely. He also talks about how the mind creates these elaborate roles or mental performances that further obscure the immediacy of the now.
Okay.
We become so deeply invested in these narratives about who we are, our identities based on our past, our roles in life, our future aspirations, that we completely lose touch with the simple reality of the present moment. This often fuels an obsessive focus on the future as some kind of escape from a perceivedly unsatisfying present.
And this is where Tolle directly connects negativity and suffering to our deep preoccupation with time. Attachment to the past through regret, resentment, or idealization and anxiety about the future are all fundamentally ways of denying and resisting the now.
Yes.
They pull our attention away from the only moment where we actually have any power or any experience of reality.
And someone listening might understandably argue, but surely the future can be better than the present.
Right.
Things do improve, we set goals and achieve them. And Tolle certainly doesn't deny that superficial changes and achievements are possible within the realm of time.
Okay.
However, he contends that true lasting transformation, the kind that brings enduring peace and joy, requires us to become present enough to actually dissolve the hold of the past by consistently accessing the power of the now. Otherwise, he suggests, the future will likely just be a repetition of our past patterns, albeit perhaps in a slightly different guise.
He makes a really crucial point. The quality of your consciousness right now in this very moment is what fundamentally shapes the nature of your future experiences.
That's right.
If your mind is carrying a heavy burden of unresolved past pain and persistent negativity, that's precisely what you are likely to project into your future. It's like planting seeds of negativity and expecting to harvest happiness.
And this is why problems often seem to be interchangeable until we address this fundamental underlying attachment to psychological time. Even if we were to magically solve all of our current external problems without a corresponding increase in our level of presence, a similar set of challenges would likely arise almost like a persistent shadow that follows us. Ultimately, Tolle argues, the root of our suffering isn't the specific content of our problems, but rather the time-bound reactive mind itself.
He really drives home the point that you simply cannot be simultaneously unhappy and fully present in the now.
Yeah.
Unhappiness, he says, invariably stems from resisting what is in the present moment, and that resistance is almost always fueled by unresolved emotional baggage from the past and an anxious, controlling focus on a future that denies the reality of the now.
He even frames the breaking up of this old unconscious way of being as a significant quantum leap in the evolution of human consciousness, suggesting that it's not just a personal journey towards peace, but actually essential for our survival as a species. And our individual conscious choice to cultivate presence is a vital and necessary part of this larger collective shift.
Here's a really beautiful thought Tolle offers. When we finally stop that compulsive striving away from the share, now that constant need to be somewhere else, the inherent joy of being naturally flows into everything we do. We are no longer dependent on achieving some future outcome for our happiness, and therefore we are no longer so rigidly attached to results. Failure and success, as defined by the ego, lose their power to dictate our inner state.
Because, in the absence of psychological time as the dominant force in our lives, our primary sense of self shifts from our personal history and our future aspirations to that deeper, timeless dimension of being. The relentless need to constantly become something else, to seek validation and fulfillment in external achievements, gradually dissolves. In the world of form, we might still set goals and pursue activities, but in the deeper dimension of being, we recognize that we are already whole, complete, and at peace.
So freedom from time, according to Tolle, is ultimately freedom from that deep-seated psychological need for the past to define us and the future to fulfill us. It represents a profound and fundamental transformation of consciousness. While this shift can sometimes happen suddenly, often triggered by intense suffering for most of us, it's a more gradual process of becoming increasingly aware of those precious moments of presence and consciously choosing to focus our attention there in the eternal light.
Yeah.
So we go to chapter 4?
Yeah. Chapter 4 is titled The State of Presence, and it delves further into the nuances of consciousness and how we can more consistently inhabit this state of being fully present.
Okay.
Tolle distinguishes between what he calls ordinary unconsciousness and the more intensified state of deep unconsciousness.
All right, so ordinary unconsciousness, as he describes it, is the everyday state for the vast majority of people where we are largely identified with our ceaseless flow of thoughts and our reactive emotions.
Mm-hmm.
We operate on autopilot, driven by habitual patterns, desires, and aversions, largely unaware of that deeper, more serene state of being that lies beneath the surface of our mental activity. Have you ever gone through a whole day and then realized you weren't truly present for much of it?
Absolutely, yeah. That's a perfect example of ordinary unconsciousness.
Okay.
Tolle explains that this underlying unease of ordinary unconsciousness can intensify into what he calls deep unconsciousness. It's a state of more acute suffering and reactivity when things go wrong in our lives, when the ego feels significantly threatened, or when a deep-seated emotional wound, the pain body, is powerfully triggered. Deep unconsciousness is essentially an amplified and more volatile version of that everyday unconsciousness, often characterized by intense negativity and a strong sense of victimhood. Tolle even suggests that acts of extreme violence are rooted in this state of deep unconsciousness.
He offers a really insightful way to assess your own level of consciousness. Observe how you tend to respond to life's inevitable challenges. He suggests that an unconscious person will typically become even more deeply unconscious in the face of adversity, whereas someone who is cultivating presence can actually use challenges as opportunities to become more intensely conscious.
Right.
It's like a fork in the road. Difficulties can either pull you further into the darkness of unconsciousness or serve as an alarm clock to awaken you to the power of the now.
And this is precisely why Tolle emphasizes the importance of actively cultivating presence even in ordinary, seemingly uneventful situations. By consciously bringing more awareness into those moments when things are relatively calm and flowing smoothly, you gradually build up your presence power, as he calls it.
Okay.
This creates a kind of high-frequency energy field around you, a state of inner alertness that negativity finds increasingly difficult to penetrate. It's analogous to how light naturally dispels darkness. The more light you have, the less darkness can exist.
When you begin to truly become the observer of your own thoughts and emotions, Tolle says you might be quite surprised by the constant background static of what he calls ordinary unconsciousness.
Yeah.
You start to realize just how rarely you are truly at ease within yourself. Your internal landscape might be filled with a low-level hum of judgment, worry, and discontent. And on an emotional level, there might often be an underlying current of unease or even subtle boredom. It's like the mind is constantly chattering, even when it doesn't have anything particularly important to say.
Yeah. He shares a rather poignant anecdote from Carl Jung about a Native American chief who, observing the tense faces and perpetual restlessness of white people, remarked that they were always seemingly seeking something. This observation resonates deeply with Jesus' timeless question, why are you always anxious? And the Buddha's fundamental teaching that the root of suffering is wanting, craving, and attachment. These wisdom traditions all point to the underlying unease that characterizes the unconscious state.
So Tolle strongly encourages us to make self-observation a regular and consistent habit.
Yeah.
Throughout your day, try frequently asking yourself, am I truly at ease in this moment?
Right.
Or what is actually going on inside me beneath the surface of my thoughts? He urges us to dedicate at least as much focused attention to our inner world, our thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations, as we typically do to the external events and circumstances of our lives.
He guides us to intentionally direct our attention inward to the subtle movements of our thoughts, the nuances of our feelings, and any areas of tension or discomfort within our bodies as a way to detect any unconscious resistance we might be harboring towards the present moment.
Okay.
He offers several common examples of how we unconsciously resist the now through impatient waiting, constantly trying to escape the present through various activities or mental fantasies, or engaging in persistent complaining about what is.
And the consequences of this ingrained resistance are far-reaching, aren't they?
Yeah.
Tolle emphasizes that by essentially making the present moment our enemy, by constantly wishing it were different, we create significant inner conflict and often manifest corresponding outer conflict in our relationships and our lives.
Right.
Our individual unhappiness not only affects our own well-being and the people around us, but also contributes to the overall level of negativity within the collective human psyche. He even draws a connection between this pervasive inner psychic pollution and the physical pollution and destruction of our planet. Millions of unconscious individuals not taking responsibility for their own inner space.
He also offers a crucial caution against intellectually understanding the concept of acceptance as merely a way for the ego to continue indulging in unhappiness while appearing spiritual.
Okay.
True acceptance, he says, is not a mental agreement or resignation. It's a deep inner yielding to what is, which immediately transmutes negative feelings. And he highlights that the common experience of waiting is often a prime example of resisting the present, creating inner conflict, and diminishing the quality of your life simply because you are constantly wanting to be somewhere else in some imagined future moment.
Finally, Tolle makes a vital distinction between your life situation, your external circumstances, your personal history, your relationships, all the things that exist within the realm of time, and life itself, your deepest inner being, that timeless essence of who you truly are, which is already whole, perfect, and complete in the eternal now. He warns that the false, unhappy self that is constructed through identification with the mind will invariably fear the present moment because it perceives it as its own potential demise, and it will therefore constantly try to keep you trapped in the past or the future, anything to avoid the power and the truth of the now.
That's right.
Okay, should we go into Chapter 5?
Yeah, Chapter 5 directly addresses a question that often arises for those exploring these ideas.
Okay.
The inner purpose of your life's journey.
Great.
Listeners who are goal-oriented or who value having a sense of direction might naturally wonder how this strong emphasis on living in the present moment aligns with having ambitions, setting goals, and striving for something in the future. Tolle offers a really helpful distinction between what he calls the outer purpose of our lives, those external goals, achievements, and destinations we consciously strive for in the future, and the inner purpose, which is the continuous deepening of our connection to being in the timeless now. It's not about what you do, but how you are while you are doing it.
He underscores that the only aspect of your life's journey that is ultimately real and have any lasting significance is the single step you are taking right now. If you become so fixated on some future destination, so preoccupied with achieving your outer purpose, that you completely neglect the quality of your awareness in the present step, you inevitably miss the deeper, more fulfilling inner purpose.
That's right.
And this inner purpose, he explains, isn't about what specific task you are engaged in or where your outer journey is taking you. Rather, it's fundamentally about how you're experiencing this very moment, the quality of your consciousness, your level of presence. Your outer journey might involve countless steps across time, but your inner journey, in its essence, only has one. The step you're taking right here, right now.
Beautifully said.
Thank you. He beautifully describes how bringing deep awareness to this single present step transforms it into an expression of perfection, a direct connection with being. This present moment, when fully embraced with conscious attention, becomes both the purpose and the ultimate fulfillment of your inner spiritual journey. It's about finding the sacred within the ordinary.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Thank you. So does achieving our outer purpose even matter in this context? Tolle suggests that pursuing our external goals and ambitions does have its place and significance, particularly as long as we haven't yet fully realized our inner purpose. However, once that inner connection to being deepens, the outer purpose begins to take on a different quality. It becomes more like a game we can enjoy playing without the heavy attachment to the outcome. External success, he reminds us, is ultimately impermanent and fleeting, whereas inner success, that abiding connection to your true nature, is eternal and unchanging.
And the power that fuels this inner purpose, he explains, is simply the power of your presence. Your conscious awareness, liberated from the constant stream of thought forms.
Right.
It's about showing up fully to each moment, regardless of the task at hand.
And how do we effectively deal with the baggage of the past within this framework of present moment awareness?
Right.
Tolle advises that the most effective way to address the past is to do so on the level of the present. He cautions that the more attention you give to the past as something separate and distinct from the now, the more you actually energize it and inadvertently create a separate time-down self based on past experiences. Wow. Instead, he suggests shifting your attention to the present moment, to your current reactions, your prevailing moods, and the emotions that arise within you now. He explains that the past is not something that exists out there somewhere. It lives on within you in the present moment as memories, emotions, and conditioned patterns. By being fully present and observing these internal states without judgment or analysis, you gradually dissolve the grip of the past through the transformative power of your conscious awareness in the now. You truly find your authentic self by coming fully into the present, not by endlessly dwelling on or trying to reconstruct the past.
He reiterates the fundamental connection between cultivating intense presence and experiencing freedom from the relentless chatter of thought.
Right.
He points out that thought tends to rush in and dominate our awareness precisely when our conscious attention diminishes or wavers. He even shares a simple but profound Zen master's analogy of a stick being thrown. The ability to be fully present is likened to catching the stick in midair, requiring complete alertness and unwavering awareness of what is happening in the now.
He offers a compelling comparison between the usual state of anxious waiting, which is rooted in a desire for a future moment to arrive, and a qualitatively different kind of waiting that arises from presence. This latter form of waiting is characterized by total alertness, without any underlying tension or anxious anticipation. In this state of deep presence, the egoic personality, with its constant need for control and its fear of the unknown, temporarily fades into the background, and you experience a deeper, more authentic sense of yourself, more fully aligned with being.
That's a good point.
Thank you. He then offers a fascinating interpretation of Jesus' parables,
Okay.
such as the story of the servant diligently waiting for his master's return and the parable of the 5 wise and 5 careless women waiting the bridegroom. Tolle suggests that these stories are not primarily about some future apocalyptic event, but rather symbolic teachings about the end of psychological time, the transcendence of the egoic mind through the cultivation of presence, which he equates to the oil of consciousness in the eternal writings. Now represented by the arrival of the bridegroom, it's about awakening to the timeless reality that is always available.
Should we move on to Chapter 6?
Yeah, let's do Chapter 6.
Okay. Chapter 6 introduces a really tangible and accessible way to connect with this deeper reality, the inner body. Tolle proposes that your own physical body can become a direct and reliable point of entry into that realm of being we've been discussing throughout this deep dive.
Right.
It's a way to bypass the often unruly mind and experience presence directly.
He returns to the challenge of intellectually grasping the concept of being, almost likening it to a fish trying to understand the very water it swims in.
Yeah.
It's the fundamental reality that underlies all experience, but the mind constantly tries to categorize and label it, which ultimately falls short. It's something you have to feel and experience directly.
Right. He reiterates that being can be felt as that deep, ever-present sense of I am that exists prior to and beyond your individual name, your personal history, and your physical form. To directly feel this underlying presence, to have this experiential knowing, is what he means by enlightenment. However, he cautions against getting too caught up in the words themselves, reminding us that being primarily run by the egoic mind is what connects us to what he calls the collective insanity of humanity, the pervasive fear, despair, greed, and violence that we see reflected in the world. He gently urges each listener to look within their own minds to begin to identify the root of this in their own experience.
Right. But the inward journey through your own body, he says, leads to a profound experience of stillness, deep peace, a powerful sense of vitality, and a vibrant connection to life. You begin to realize that you are connected to something far vaster, more profound, and more sacred than just your individual physical form.